In the quiet solitude of his forest cabin, Armando has grown accustomed to a life of silence and memories. But when a starving dog and her pup arrive at his doorstep, they awaken a forgotten sense of purpose in his heart. Just as Armando begins to find comfort in their unlikely companionship, an intruder shatters the peace of his isolated home. What follows is a night of terror and courage, where loyalty is tested, bonds are forged in the face of danger, and an elderly man discovers that family can come in many forms. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any exciting stories like this one. Here, each video is a journey of overcoming an emotion that you won't want to miss. Armando lived alone in a quiet cabin on the outskirts of a small Mexican village. He often found himself consumed by the painful memories of his late wife, Eileen, who had passed away 5 years ago. Her absence had left an emptiness that seemed to fill every corner of his life, from his empty bed to the garden she once tended with such care. As he sat by the window each evening, the world outside glowed with the colors of sunset, yet they seemed dull to him. Armando's once bright world had become colorless and cold. The silence in his home was absolute, more haunting than comforting. He remembered how the house used to be filled with laughter, the sound of his children running and playing, and Eileen's warm voice calling them to supper. Now, all he heard were echoes of the past. His children, Ana, Myrna, and Ignacio, had long since grown up and moved away to different cities, occupied with their own families and jobs. Though they occasionally called, the conversations were brief and filled with hurried explanations of their busy lives. A part of Armando understood. Life, he thought, simply moves on, and perhaps his children no longer needed him. But it still hurt that they seemed so distant. He often gazed at an old black and white photo of his family when they were younger, cherishing those simpler times. Every crease on his face seemed to carry a memory, a reminder of a life once filled with love and laughter. But now, those memories seemed to fade like the colors of the setting sun. Each morning, Armando followed a routine that helped fill his day. He would care for the few plants in the garden, even though they were overrun with weeds, and then take a walk by the lake near his cabin. This walk gave him some peace, allowing him to reflect on his past and remember Eileen. Surrounded by the quiet sounds of nature, he could momentarily forget his loneliness. Yet, each return to the empty house brought back the familiar sting of isolation. As Armando settled into the silence each night, he wished his children would call more often or visit. He knew, however, that he was mostly a fleeting thought in their busy minds. With each passing year, he had grown accustomed to the solitude, but the pain of feeling forgotten lingered, always present, especially in the quiet of the night. One cold evening, as Armando returned from his walk, he noticed something strange. The window in his kitchen was wide open. He was certain he had closed it before leaving. Cautiously, he approached the cabin, feeling an unusual tension in the air. When he entered, he found the floor covered in muddy paw prints, leading to the kitchen table where he had left some food to defrost. His heart raced as he considered who, or what, had entered his home. When he stepped into the kitchen, Armando saw a large, thin dog with matted fur hunched over the table, devouring the meat he had left out. Startled, the dog looked up, meeting Armando's gaze with eyes that were both fearful and desperate. Armando felt an instant connection to the animal's struggle, seeing his own loneliness and survival reflected in the dog's weary eyes. "It's all right," he murmured, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. The dog paused, watching Armando carefully. After a tense moment, it growled softly, grabbed the remaining meat, and darted toward the open door, disappearing into the snowy forest. Armando stood there in shock, wondering what had driven the creature to his door and why it had left such a deep impression on him. His thoughts lingered on the dog's eyes, full of a desperation that echoed his own. As the night wore on, Armando couldn't shake the feeling that he should have done something to help the dog. He imagined it out there in the freezing night, searching for food and warmth, just as he was searching for connection and comfort. With a heavy heart, he resolved to follow the dog's trail in the morning, hoping he might find it and perhaps offer some help. The next day, Armando bundled up in his warmest coat and followed the faint pawprints leading into the forest. The journey through the snow and cold reminded him of his own hardships, of the distance between him and his loved ones. But he kept walking, driven by a need to reach out and help the animal who seemed to mirror his own soul. Armando followed the tracks deeper into the forest, winding through trees and past frozen streams. The air grew colder, but he pressed on, determined to find the dog he had seen the night before. As he walked, he thought about how strange it was that he was willing to endure the bitter cold for a creature he barely knew. Yet something inside him urged him forward, as if helping the dog would somehow ease his own loneliness. Finally, after what felt like hours, he came upon a small clearing. Under the shelter of a fallen tree, he spotted the dog, curled up protectively around two small puppies. One of the pups lay still and lifeless, having succumbed to the freezing temperatures, but the other was barely clinging to life, shivering under the warmth of its mother. Armando felt his heart ache at the sight, knowing the small family's suffering all too well. Carefully, he knelt down, extending a hand to the mother dog, who watched him warily but did not move away. Armando spoke to her in a soft, reassuring voice. "I can help you," he whispered, reaching for the shivering pup. The mother dog gave him a weary, silent nod, as if understanding his intention. Armando gently wrapped the pup in his scarf, pressing it to his chest to share his warmth. With the fragile pup in his arms and the mother dog following closely, Armando led them back toward his cabin. The journey back was slow and filled with a new sense of purpose for Armando. He realized that he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense of responsibility, a need to protect and care for these creatures who had stumbled into his life. When they reached his cabin, Armando quickly set a fire in the hearth and laid the small pup near the warmth, while the mother lay beside it, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. Armando sat beside them, feeling for the first time in years that he was not alone. Over the next few days, Armando found himself caring for the mother dog, whom he named Pelusa, and her surviving pup, whom he named Leo. Pelusa watched over her pup with a vigilant gaze, while Leo grew stronger each day, his tiny body slowly recovering from the cold. Armando marveled at the transformation in his once silent cabin, now filled with the sounds of Leo's playful yips and Pelusa's quiet watchfulness. The presence of Pelusa and Leo brought warmth back into Armando's life. He began to feel a sense of companionship he had thought lost forever after Eileen's passing. Watching Leo grow stronger and more energetic, Armando felt as if he, too, was regaining a sense of vitality and joy. Each morning, he looked forward to seeing the little pup dart around the cabin, bringing life to every corner. Pelusa quickly became protective of Armando, always staying close by as if to guard him from harm. She seemed to sense his loneliness, often watching him with a calm, understanding gaze. Armando found comfort in Pelusa's loyalty, grateful for her presence. The three of them, man, dog, and pup, formed a small, unusual family, bound by shared loneliness and mutual care. Their days settled into a new rhythm. Armando would spend his mornings tending to the garden, always accompanied by Pelusa and Leo. In the evenings, they would walk to the lake together, enjoying the peaceful solitude of the forest. With each passing day, Armando felt his heart heal, his loneliness replaced by a quiet contentment. For the first time in years, Armando felt like he had a purpose again. Pelusa and Leo were not just pets, they were his companions, filling his life with a love and loyalty he thought he would never experience again. He found himself smiling more often, his spirit lighter than it had been in years. One winter night, Armando was jolted awake by a strange noise. He held his breath, listening closely, trying to discern whether it was just the wind or something more. But then he heard it again, the unmistakable sound of footsteps on his wooden floor. His heart pounded as he realized that someone had entered his cabin. His first thought was for Pelusa and Leo, who were fast asleep beside him, oblivious to the approaching danger. Before he could move, his bedroom door burst open, and 3 masked men stormed in. One held a gun, while the others carried heavy bats. Armando, frightened and disoriented, raised his hands in a pleading gesture, begging them not to hurt him. "Please, I have little to give, but take whatever you want," he managed to say, his voice trembling. The men ignored his plea, rummaging through his belongings with harsh, careless movements. One of them shouted, demanding to know where he kept his money. Armando explained he had little to spare, his only income being his small savings and the occasional support his children sent. But his words fell on deaf ears, and one of the intruders struck him hard, sending him collapsing to the ground, clutching his side in agony. As Armando lay there, racked with pain, he felt an overwhelming sense of abandonment. His thoughts drifted to his children, wondering if they would care if something happened to him. But then, amidst the violence, he heard a low growl. Turning his head, he saw Pelusa standing, her body tense, her gaze fixed on the intruders. Armando whispered desperately, "No, Pelusa, stay back." But the loyal dog refused to listen, sensing the threat to her beloved companion. With a fierce snarl, Pelusa lunged at one of the men, sinking her teeth into his arm. The man screamed, desperately trying to shake her off, but she held on with a determination Armando had never seen. In the chaos, little Leo, filled with bravery beyond his size, darted forward and bit another man's ankle, throwing the intruders into complete disarray. Pelusa's unexpected attack had caught the intruders off guard, filling them with fear and confusion. The man with the gun, his hand shaking, aimed it at Pelusa. But before he could fire, Leo bit down hard on his leg, causing him to stumble and discharge the gun into the ceiling. The deafening shot echoed through the cabin, sending everyone into a state of panic. The men, now terrified by the relentless defense from the dogs, tried to regain control. One of them took a wild swing at Pelusa with his bat, but she dodged, baring her teeth and growling ferociously. Armando, still on the ground and struggling to catch his breath, watched in awe as his loyal companions fought for his life. Despite the fear and pain, a glimmer of hope began to stir in him. As the chaos continued, one of the men finally broke, shouting, "Let's get out of here. It's not worth it." He staggered towards the door, bleeding from the bites he had sustained. The others followed, their retreat hastened by Pelusa's snapping jaws and Leo's persistent attacks. In their desperate escape, they stumbled and fell over each other, eager to flee the cabin that had seemed so easy to rob. The intruders vanished into the snowy night, leaving a stunned silence behind them. Pelusa, panting heavily, stood by the door, watching to ensure they were truly gone. Leo, still trembling, returned to Armando's side, nuzzling him gently as if to reassure him. Armando, his body aching, reached out to them both, his heart filled with gratitude and amazement. For a moment, Armando simply sat there, gathering his breath and strength. He realized that, without Pelusa and Leo, he might not have survived the night. These 2 animals, who had entered his life so unexpectedly, had risked everything to protect him. As he held them close, he whispered, "Thank you. You saved me." It was a simple statement, but it held all the love and gratitude he felt. The following day, the news of the attack spread quickly through the small community. Concerned neighbors came to check on Armando, bringing supplies and offering their support. One of them had called the police during the commotion, alerted by the sounds of gunfire, and officers soon arrived to investigate the scene. Armando, bruised and exhausted, recounted the events, speaking with pride of Pelusa and Leo's courage. As the officers listened, they too marveled at the loyalty and bravery of the dogs. They promised Armando that they would search for the intruders, but it was clear that the attempted robbery had left a mark on the small, tight-knit community. While the villagers shared Armando's relief that he was safe, many were shaken by the thought that such violence could touch their quiet lives. Word of the attack eventually reached Armando's children. When Ana, Myrna, and Ignacio heard what had happened, they were horrified. They had been busy with their own lives, scarcely aware of the quiet life their father had been leading. Shocked by the reality of how close they had come to losing him, they resolved to visit him, determined to ensure his safety. A few days later, Armando heard the sound of a car approaching his cabin. Surprised, he walked out to see his children stepping out, their faces filled with worry. Armando, though touched, felt a pang of sadness, realizing that it had taken such an extreme event to bring them together. But as they embraced him, he felt years of distance and unspoken words melt away. The reunion was emotional, filled with apologies and promises to stay closer. His children helped him clean and repair the cabin, each of them sharing stories of their own lives. Armando listened, happy to be with them again, yet realizing that his true companions, Pelusa and Leo, had been by his side all along. He felt grateful that his children had come, but he also knew that he had already found a new family in his loyal friends. As the days passed, Armando's children began urging him to leave the cabin and come live with them. Anna, his eldest, expressed her concern, saying, "It's not safe here, Papa. You can't be alone after what happened." But Armando simply smiled, shaking his head gently. "This is my home. It's where I belong," he replied. He knew they meant well, but the thought of leaving behind the life he had built felt impossible. Pelusa and Leo had become his family, a steady presence that filled his heart and his days with meaning. Here, in the cabin surrounded by the forest, he felt a connection he hadn't known for years. Moving away, even for the safety his children offered, would mean abandoning the peace he had found with his loyal friends. Reluctantly, his children began to accept his decision. They visited him often in the following weeks, checking in on him and making sure he was well. Armando cherished these moments, feeling closer to them than he had in years. But he remained firm in his choice to stay, knowing that his bond with Pelusa and Leo was something he couldn't bear to leave. One afternoon, as he walked with his children by the lake, Myrna asked him, "Are you sure you'll be all right, Papa?" Armando looked out at the water, the setting sun casting a warm glow on the landscape. "Yes, Mija," he said softly, "I have everything I need right here." The reassurance in his voice put his children at ease, and they embraced him once more before saying their goodbyes. As their car disappeared down the dirt road, Armando stood with Pelusa and Leo at his side, feeling a profound sense of peace. He knew he would always miss his children, but his heart was content knowing that his true family, both human and animal, would always be with him in spirit. With his children back in their respective homes, Armando settled into his old routine, now with Pelusa and Leo as his steadfast companions. The once empty cabin was now filled with life. Every day, Leo's boundless energy brought joy and laughter, while Pelusa's watchful gaze offered a sense of security and loyalty that Armando held dear. Each morning, Armando took his two friends on a walk to the lake. Watching Leo dart around, chasing leaves, and Pelusa keeping a watchful eye, Armando felt like he had been given a second chance. The loneliness that had haunted him for so long had vanished, replaced by a quiet happiness that grew with each passing day. As winter gave way to spring, Armando began to notice a change in himself. He felt lighter, more at peace. The simple routines with his dogs, the gentle pace of life, and the warmth of his cabin filled him with a deep satisfaction. He no longer felt the weight of regret or loneliness. Instead, he was grateful for each day he spent in the company of his loyal friends. One sunny afternoon, as they walked by the lake, Armando turned to Pelusa and Leo. "You saved me, you know," he said softly, smiling. Pelusa tilted her head, as if she understood, while Leo wagged his tail, looking up at him with bright, trusting eyes. Armando realized that, with them, he had all the family he would ever need. In the quiet beauty of the forest, Armando felt truly alive. The pain of the past had faded, replaced by a sense of belonging that went beyond words. Pelusa and Leo had given him not just companionship, but a new purpose, a reminder that love and loyalty could be found even in the most unexpected places. As Armando embraced his new life with Pelusa and Leo, the winter turned to spring, bringing fresh warmth to the forest around his cabin. The long days were filled with the quiet routines he had come to cherish. But one chilly, misty morning, Armando was surprised by the unexpected sound of his phone ringing. It was Anna, her voice filled with concern and a newfound sense of urgency. "Papa," she said, "we've all been talking, we'd like to visit more often, and make sure you're not alone." Armando's heart warmed, sensing the genuine care in his daughter's voice. Though he'd grown used to living with Pelusa and Leo as his companions, he felt a comforting sense of connection from his children's interest in reconnecting. "That sounds wonderful, Mija," he replied, his voice steady yet touched by a hint of emotion. It wasn't a goodbye to his independence, but the start of a new chapter where his family, both human and animal, felt closer than they had in years. True to their word, Anna, Myrna, and Ignacio visited more often, each time adding their laughter and stories to Armando's cabin. With Pelusa by his side, standing guard, and Leo's playful antics filling the space, Armando felt his once lonely cabin now resonated with life, love, and a sense of unity that hadn't been there since Eileen's passing. He found himself cooking more, sharing meals that brought back the warmth of family dinners from long ago. One particularly warm evening, as Armando and his children sat around the small fire outside his cabin, Leo curled up on his lap and Pelusa lay at his feet. Armando took a moment to gaze at each of his children, seeing the bond that had grown stronger despite the distance and time that had separated them. He was no longer a man haunted by loneliness but one surrounded by the companionship he had so deeply missed. The days that followed were filled with small joys, a walk by the lake with his children, sharing stories of Eileen, watching Pelusa and Leo grow and play under the endless sky. Armando finally felt at peace, not just with his loyal animals but with the family he had once thought lost to him. Surrounded by those he loved, he understood that, despite life's challenges, he had been given a chance to build a family anew. And as the stars emerged one by one in the night sky, Armando sat with Pelusa and Leo nestled by his side, feeling grateful for the love that had found him again in life's unexpected moments. The cabin, once quiet and dark, now pulsed with a light that would continue to warm his soul in the years to come. In his heart, he knew that he would never again be truly alone. If you liked this story and want more content like this, leave a like, share it with someone you know will be moved by it, and of course, subscribe to the channel. Together, we will explore inspiring stories and moments that touch the heart. Until the next video.